Hey, deserving listeners, at popular request, I am continuing to watch Couples Therapy on Showtime, I believe. I'm going to react to it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. By the way, it's a bit of a pet peeve that we now call it couples therapy. Back in my time, we called it couple therapy. We wouldn't pluralize individuals therapy or families therapy or groups therapy. We call it group therapy, individual therapy, or family therapy. Why do we call it couples therapy? I guess it just rolls off the tongue more easily. I'm not sure. But I give in. I give up. I'm now calling it couples therapy. Let's watch.
Mm-hmm.
I bring things to you that mean a lot to me, and you are very...
dismissive?
Yeah.
Do you recognize any of this kind of...
I understand why she feels this way.
No, but do you recognize that in yourself?
Okay, so this is a very frequent thing that happens in couples therapy. One person comes in and is essentially saying, I feel rejected, I feel dismissed, I feel like my partner isn't listening to me, I feel like they don't care about my feelings, I feel like they don't give me enough space, I feel like they don't really take what I'm saying to heart, I feel like they don't care about my feelings, they don't care to listen to me. Some version of that. It is a very frequent thing that we will feel in long-term relationships. She worded it in a particular way. In fact, she was having trouble coming up with the words, and she turned to her spouse and said, I feel like you, and then he says, dismiss you? He completed the sentence. So as a couples therapist, what do you do? Well, again, it depends on what the goal is. And I think what they are there for is to, which is what most couples are in therapy for, is to reduce their conflict and to increase their connection or intimacy or goodwill or romance or something, their love. So reduce conflict, increase connection. And they often will say we need to work on communication. 90% of couples that come to me, they say, we want to work on communication. And it's just my style. I tend to think like, well, I think the communication issue is what you want to work on so that you can reduce conflict and increase connection. The communication just feels easier to say or something. I'm not quite sure. Or they've heard other couples say that that's why they're going to couples therapy. But anyway, so as a therapist, what do? She just basically said, he doesn't listen to me. He dismisses me. He doesn't care. And I imagine if the therapist sees what we see, that we would not be surprised by that the husband is dismissive, that he doesn't really listen or doesn't give her enough respect, doesn't really enter her world, doesn't have a ton of empathy. I think he does in a certain way, but he also comes across in this, shall I say, arrogant, above it all, know-it-all kind of attitude, which is usually a defense, which I think we saw a little bit underneath the service during the last episode I did. So as a therapist, what do? Again, the goal is to reduce conflict, increase intimacy. Usually. I don't know, but I suspect that. So there's usually two different roads that therapists will take. She took the second road, which I actually don't recommend. When I see my trainees do this, I go, whoa. There's a more effective way of doing this. So the second road that she took was essentially, and I'll rewind it, essentially she turns to him and she says, do you recognize that you do this? So that question implies very strongly that the therapist agrees with the wife. The wife is saying something and the therapist says, I agree with you. Husband, why are you like this? And it puts the husband on the defensive. Naturally, he's defensive anyway. And then he says, he's trying to avoid, and then he's cornered. And then he says, well, I understand why she feels that way. So in all likelihood, that is true for him. He's not being a psychopath in that moment. He actually, I don't know, but he probably actually doesn't feel that way. He probably actually feels on the inside that he's really trying to listen to her. But it's not coming across that way, apparently, and we can imagine that it wouldn't come across that way. So the therapist is essentially rushing through therapy is what I usually tell my trainees. Well, slow down, take one step at a time, and manage your countertransference. It would be and I read your comments, a lot of you are triggered by him or having some emotional reactivity towards him. And that as now as a audience member, you're free to have whatever reaction you want to. As a therapist, we have to really know our countertransference and manage it. We have to, while we're helping clients, we have to have one eye on, or at least 10% of our attention on our emotional reactivity, which can be hard to detect on a good day, let alone when we're distracted by the action of being a therapist. And usually this is practice makes perfect. You have to investigate your family of origin. You have to investigate your past relationships. You have to investigate your personality. You have to investigate your traumas. You have to go to therapy. You have to write a lot of papers about it. You got to talk to your supervisors and your mentors, and you have to really have a lot of personal reflections so that you can very quickly in the moment know, oh, I'm being triggered. Because if you wait until this moment to suddenly have to think, am I being triggered? Well, you're going to be too distracted from the task at hand, which is trying to be helpful. Now, I don't know if she's being triggered in this moment, but she is, in my view, my style. So whenever I watch any depiction of therapy, there are two modes or two critiques that I'll have. One is that I will identify that as bad therapy. The other, I will identify it as a stylistic thing. What she's doing is more of a stylistic thing. It's edging on what I would deem to be a little bad. It's not terrible, but it is rushing. What I would do in this situation, so wife says to me, he doesn't listen to me. He dismisses me. I would first validate her, really try, what does that feel like? What do you mean by that? Because when people tell me they're being dismissed, I really don't know what that means exactly. And it's really important that I phenomenologically investigate that for their sake so that they feel like they're really being heard, and for the spouse to really understand as well. But anyway, so try to validate that. And then to say to him, do you think you do that? Or what do you have to say? So more of an open-ended question instead of a accusatory question, because I know he's going to go on the defensive anyway, and I might as well not provoke him and cause a power struggle between me and him, or a relationship rupture between me and him, which is going to do no one any good. If I cause a relationship rupture, I can't do any good. So I would slow down and go step by step. She just made an accusation. It's probably true. It's definitely true to her experience, and it's probably true for a lot of people if they were in her shoes. But we don't know for sure, and why do we need to know for sure? It's really their phenomenological world that we have to live in. And so I would turn to him and I would say, well, first off, so many other slowing down kinds of things. One is I might say, okay, husband, before you get defensive or before you, whatever you're going to do, can you just take a beat and reflect to your wife that you understand what she's saying, whether or not you disagree or agree? Because this is a good communication skill that can be very grounding in a relationship. Sometimes that's all you need to do in a relationship is, I have cat hair in my nose. I picked up my cat and cat hair went everywhere. And then I sat down and turned on the camera and cat hair's in my face and it's itching me everywhere. And to help, so sometimes all couples need, and all we need, is to be heard. If this is a pro tip for a relationship, your spouse is complaining about you, one of the best things you can do, and sometimes the only thing you need to do, is to convey that you understand what they're saying. You can disagree in your head. You can think of all the different reasons why they're wrong. You could even think, well, maybe how do I fix it? That's okay, but if sometimes all you need to do is be like, okay, let me get it. Let me understand. You're saying that I do X, Y, and Z, and that really hurts you. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I really get what you're saying. You don't have to say I agree. You don't have to say I'm going to change it. You don't have to say anything. Just understanding people is a huge part of what we're looking for in relationships. And honestly, police officers and customer service people, when skilled police officers, skilled customer service people will do this too. You'll be complaining about the service at a restaurant. You'll be like, da 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 da, and the knee-jerk reaction is try to either argue or fix it, when often all people just want is just to be heard. Okay, what I'm hearing you say is there was a fly in your soup, sir. Is that what you're saying? Yes, there was a fly in my soup. And you are saying that we are a terrible restaurant for allowing a fly to get in your soup. Yes, this is a terrible, and you feel like we should give you your money back. Is that right? Yes, I feel like you should give them my money back. And then you do all that, and then the customer might be like, well, thanks for listening. But you have to really understand. Anyway, so I might engineer that from him to understand her. The other thing but more likely I would do is I would turn to him and I would say, what do you think? Your wife has I hear kind of I would also reframe it as a request instead of a complaint. That's another thing that I do a lot in therapy is clients will bring what sound like complaints and I will word it or I will frame it as a request because that's more positive. Instead of you're wrong, it's this is what I would like you. This is what you could do to make me happy. That's a very different message. You always are late versus I love it when you're on time. Very different message. And behaviorism demonstrates to us when we test this on humans or chickens or dogs or snakes that when you have that positive reinforcement that shapes behavior more quickly. Anyway, so I would ask him, what do you think about that? Do you think that what do you think about her request? Sounds like she's requesting that you listen to her more. That's what I'm hearing. What do you think about that? And then he can get defensive, but at the very least, I'm not getting into a power struggle with him. So let's rewind and watch what she did.
No, but do you recognize that in yourself?
I recognize why she sees that. So I know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
But it'd be like me, telling you what one side of this is and then thinking it's the whole side. No, I got it. Yeah. If you look at it that way.
Okay, good. Now, the therapist has been pretty good up to this point, so I'm guessing she is hearing what he's saying. He says it in a very complicated, kind of arrogant way. It's a off-putting way. Maybe I should say that. I don't know if it's arrogant per se, but it's off-putting, at least to me. The way he talks, and I know from a lot of your comments below, he just comes across in this way. Like, there's so many other ways he could say what he's saying right now. He could just be like, yeah, I get what she's saying, but I don't know. I feel like I'd try to listen. So I don't know. I don't know if I agree with her. Just say that. You don't have to go in the way he says it and the sort of, I don't know, superior pseudo-intellectual. Now that's my kind of transference talking. So anyway, I'm guessing the therapist is going to notice that. But let's watch.
And then the other side, so here's the one side is that's mean, those are ugly words you're throwing at me or like making me feel small. But the other side is that you can't wait to show me is what a great and supportive husband you are and how supportive and da-da, which just makes my side irrelevant, which is your whole point of doing it.
So she's communicating really well. And she might even be depicting the core issue of their relationship, at least one of them that we've seen so far, is that she is looking for a particular feeling, looking for a connection, looking for respect, or looking for him to exhibit empathy or connection or something, humanness. And he feels like he is, I think, on a minute-by-minute basis, he's struggling to survive emotionally. That's my sense of him. And he has elaborate defenses to try to help him survive.
Baby, that was a terrible example.
You are being mean to me.
I already said I understand why you feel that way.
But you don't. You
Yeah, I know I do.
absolutely
I
don't.
still do.
But okay, but if
I
you
did when I said it, and I still do. I
okay,
don't
then
lost track
so
of it.
what part of that is on you? Like,
Can you play
But
back
what just say what part is on you?
So the therapist is still kind of digging in on that, and the two of them are essentially ganging up on him. Now, maybe the therapist knows that she's doing that. She's like, I'm at that point where I really want to kind of dig in on this guy a little bit. And that absolutely can be a viable strategy. That's a style thing. That's not a bad therapy necessarily thing. I don't do that. I don't, at least consciously, I don't try to gang up on people. I think that there are more effective ways. But I will tell you that when I get to a point where I feel like I've tried everything I could possibly try to engage someone and get someone on board with the basic tenets of therapy, sometimes I'll throw everything out the window and I'll just blast someone. And like 50% of the time, it actually works, strangely, particularly with resistant men. I think some resistant men, sort of the macho end of the spectrum, they need me to macho up with them and to just tell them like, to speak like a macho guy and just to yell at them and tell them like, you're ridiculous and you're stupid and there's something wrong with your head and you're an arrogant piece of crap and you need to knock it off. Like, I've done that before, rarely. And Sometimes I'm doing it under some controlled way that I'm actually doing it strategically on a guess, on a hunch that it will actually, or an educated guess that will actually work with someone. And other times I'm just flipping out. I mean, I've been a therapist for 25 years. I've flipped out many times. I mean, you spend 8 hours a day talking with 8 different clients, couples, families, individuals. It's a lot to hold on to, and it's a lot to clamp down on. And sometimes, just think about for yourself. Now, I know some of you are therapists and you understand this, but just imagine for yourself the past 25 years. Think of all the stuff that you've been through, all the ups and downs, the euphoria of a new relationship, the horribleness and grief of a death or a divorce or a breakup, massive health problems, a cancer scare that's random, having a baby, raising children, moving into a new home, getting a new job. Imagine all of those things happening in the midst of your week with 8 hours a day of therapy. And you get news from the doctor that lump in your body is a little concerning, and you have to hang up the phone and work with 4 more clients for the rest of the day. And you can't cancel your client, or you can, but if you canceled every time you did that, you probably wouldn't have a practice. So it's going to take its toll. The day you don't get good sleep, the day that you are super tired, or the day that you're kind of sick or you don't really know it. So there's good days and bad days is the point. And some of those bad days, very rarely, I will just completely lose my crap. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, I do my best to repair the relationship. Sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't.
I mean, you're saying to Annie, look, there's a part that is yours, which is the way you approach me.
Mm-hmm. What part's yours?
But and here's where I can meet you. Here's my part.
Look, I'm struggling to find what that is.
So we're hitting a wall of resistance from him. That's what we call it, resistance. He is resisting. He's resisting the therapist's very straightforward questions of that she's talking about her part. What is your part? Now, it could be argued that she hasn't necessarily said her part, at least in the clip that we've seen. But maybe I wouldn't doubt that she has a much easier time identifying that. And he is evading. He's like, I don't understand what's going on here. I understand how she feels that way, but there's another side to the story. I'm a bit confused as to what's going on here. I bet you he absolutely knows what's going on here. He is being asked to admit that he has faults, that he makes mistakes, that he is unfair to his wife sometimes. And given his defensive structure, that is much too hard of a question for him to answer. It's too destructive to his defensive structure to begin to even think that he has done something wrong. That's my suspicion. So what do you do with that? Do you try to break it down? Do you try to work with it? That's usually my tact. So one of the options that I would say as a therapist right here is, okay. So husband, I feel like we've kind of gone down a road here for a second, and basically I've been sitting here trying to convince you to say that you make mistakes sometimes as a husband. Sometimes you make mistakes. And I don't know if you make mistakes or not. You're the only one who really knows. Your wife probably has ideas, but really you're the only one who can really evaluate that. Okay, so why would I say it like that? Well, I'm putting him in the driver's seat. I'm also relieving the tension of the power struggle. I'm also saying, hey, dude, you're the expert. You tell me. Because he might feel better and more apt to admit he's done something wrong if he's driving the car. Let's see how this works out, though.
Because you're
Come
right.
on, you can.
No, I'm being sincere. When you already have it, it's not missing from your relationship.
Just say it again. Even if you're doing that effort, you can just say, here's what I'm trying to do.
So I don't know. Maybe this is a style thing. I'll say it's a style thing. The therapist is really hammering on him. Now, again, as an audience member, I'm sure you're saying he needs to be hammered more than what she's doing. Therapy isn't about hammering people. Therapy is about helping people. And if someone is here and their defensive structure is making it difficult to get them over here, you don't just try to force them over here. You take one step at a time. People's traumas can really set them back from where you're trying to get them to go. And like I always say to my students, people come to therapy with problems. And sometimes I have to remind my trainees that of like, you understand that people don't come to therapy with no problems, right? And you understand that people come to therapy with issues that have been there their entire lives and are hard for them to overcome. And you can't just, berate someone or, yell at someone or be very pointed with someone and say, just stop doing that. We understand that people have psychological problems that lead them to therapy. So again, maybe the therapist is thinking, well, look, all bets are off. I've got to hammer this guy. This is ridiculous. He has to start talking about what he's responsible for or else. Now, as a therapist, I would just level with him. I wouldn't continue to hammer. I would say something like, look, I'm getting the impression, pal, that you, I won't say it like that. I'm getting the impression, husband, whom I enjoy, that you don't really believe you do anything wrong. Is that true? And he'd say, well, I don't know. I kind of feel like I don't really do a lot. I think she's the one who does all the wrong things. And I'd be like, okay, so I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but you know better than I do. And if that's how you feel, I don't know if this whole couples therapy thing is going to work, because people come to my office and ask me to help them. They don't usually come to my office asking me to change someone else. And at least I can't do it that way. So if you want this to work, you have to start digging down deep. I've had those conversations with people, and sometimes that actually can switch people. They can start saying, oh, yeah, I guess that is true. I guess it is true that therapy is about me showing up. And sometimes I'll even tell people, look, before the next session, I want you to think about what you want me to help you with. Because if there's nothing that you want me to help you with or your wife to help you with in this session, then there's really no point in you coming. And once I got to that point, it was because you also, as a therapist, you have to get to a point where you have the confidence and really the professional ability, meaning that you're not, so in the beginning of my career, I was so dependent on clients because I literally could not pay my bills if I lost a client, that you would kind of tiptoe around clients a little bit, or at least I did. But once I got to a point where if I lost a client, another one would just step into their place because I would have a waiting list, then I could be a little bit more upfront with clients about this issue of just like, look, if you don't need therapy, if you don't want to be here, then you're just kind of wasting our time. I would say that in a way of inviting them into a place where they can actually utilize therapy in a meaningful way, though.
Here's what I'm already successful at doing.
That's not the same thing.
I think you'll get way more traction if you say, rather than say, I've been doing it all this time, is if you say, I can try harder to not be dismissive.
But he hasn't agreed that he is dismissive yet, I don't think. So he has to first admit he's dismissive before he can say, I need to work on being dismissive. And it would probably just naturally follow if he could admit. So she's rushing. She's saying, you need to, okay, she told me, she says you're dismissive, and I've decided you are dismissive, even though you disagree with me, but I've decided, so you need to just stop that. So how are you going to stop that? That's essentially what the therapist is doing, in my opinion. And it's not, now maybe it'll work. I've been surprised. Maybe he'll be like, oh, okay, you're right. Let's watch.
What triggers me is when you talk to me in this way or that way, but I still want to keep making the effort to be respectful.
Yeah, that's insulting.
To whom?
To me. That's
So again, he's not agreeing with the premise that he is dismissing. So I don't know, but there's a possibility that he went through a lot of over-dominant, he experienced a lot of inferiority to someone's very superiority back when he was a child or something, or he witnessed that. And he has that dynamic inside of his psyche where there is a dominant part of himself and an inferior part of himself, a victimized part of himself. And it is constantly a battle. This is object relations, internalized representations, projective identification. Listen to all my episodes on that. And people will tend to identify habitually with one side or the other, and they will project the other side. Sometimes people that go through that, they will identify with the inferior side, and they will find dominant superior people to interact with, and the conflict will happen that way. And they will find people that will dominate them, and then they will give this impression that they're inferior and weak. Whereas other people might identify with the dominant side and make other people feel as though they're inferior. So I don't know about him, but it's possible that he does that to people through projective identification. It's very subtle. It's subconscious. We're doing it in a defensive way. I can go into the details on that. But what is possible, and so transference, countertransference works out along these lines as well. So when you have those internalized dyads, it's inevitable that the therapist will be manipulated to play one of those roles. So right now, it could be argued that the therapist is actually taking on the dominant role and making him inferior, because she's actually slightly talking down to him and being dominant with him, being kind of forceful with him. Now, again, you could say it's therapeutic, and maybe it is, but we would have to ask the therapist how she's feeling, what is her goal right now. But if I was watching this and she was a trainee, I would ask her what she thought. Do you think that the client is manipulating you into acting like his father, who was very superior and would bulldoze him, because you're kind of bulldozing him a little bit? I understand why you're doing it, because he is off-putting and he's not very helpful and he isn't really bought into therapy yet. I understand the premise behind what you're doing, but are you clouded? Are you becoming clouded based on his subconscious manipulation of you to agree with a projective identification through transference?
It's a
Bear that
ridiculous
insult.
thing to say.
Bear that insult. It'll be good for your marriage.
No, I won't do it, and I don't want it. If you were to give me everything I ever wanted by doing that, I'd say no. I'd rather have nothing than have that.
I'm not exactly sure what he's saying, but I think what he's saying, and I would, if I was a therapist, I would ask him very clear, what exactly you're saying? What do you think we're asking you to do? But I think what he's saying is, for me to admit I've done something wrong, that would, essentially, he's a black and white thinker. So he's either in a zone where he's perfect, or if there's any kind of insult to him or any kind of fault that he has to admit, it's completely insulting and it's all bad and he's all bad, and he refuses to go there, of course, because he doesn't believe he's all bad. No one thinks he's all bad. But black and white thinkers and narcissistic people tend to react that way. So let's see what the therapist does here.
It feels like we're going nowhere in a way because of his defensiveness, and he won't make use of.
Okay, so Virginia is Orna's clinical advisor. I'm not sure what that means. Usually we have consultants or supervisors. So a supervisor is responsible for you, responsible for your practice and ultimately your clients. And a consultant is paid or an informal professional that could be above you or at your level or even below your level, and it's just another, you're bouncing ideas off of that person, and that consultant isn't responsible for your practice. In my career, I've had both, from both sides. I've had supervisors, I've had consultants, and I've also had supervisees and consultees. It's a very important relationship. It goes all the way back to Freud. Freud believed in this relationship, making sure that there was a mentor-mentee relationship or even just consulting relationship. It's very important. Therapy is very weird. We have a lot of transference issues happening. We have our own issues that are cropping up, and so let's see. But the advisor word, I have a feeling that this show is dancing around the legality of what's happening, because I think I read this article that claims that what is happening on the show isn't therapy, even though it's called couples therapy. But I think for legal reasons, they're not actually calling it a clinical service, because if something went wrong, they want to avoid being sued. And so I don't know, but I think that's why they're calling it clinical advisor, because I've literally never heard that term before. I've heard of academic advisors. I'm an academic advisor to my students, but to my advisees. But maybe, I think this is an East Coast show, so maybe they have that term. I don't know.
Anything that I say and very little of what his wife says. Mm-hmm. So it feels like I'm up against this armor of resistance.
Uh-huh.
So good. She is saying, I'm up against resistance. And yeah, you're clearly hammering against the resistance, and the resistance is getting stronger. The more energy you give to the resistance, the harder the resistance gets, and you have to figure out another way. And it usually, when we are hammering on resistance, it has more to do with our issues rather than our clinical judgment.
His claim is that everyone gets dismissed at
In the
various
world, in
points
life.
in the world.
Yeah, right.
And that she should just defend.
No, I know.
He says that, but I'm quite sure that that is a justification. He says, look, my wife, she thinks that she's dismissed by me, but everyone gets dismissed. What's the big deal? I'm quite sure he's saying that because of his relational traumas that make him so terrified to admit that he's done something wrong.
He says she should suck it up. I give her so much, and we would have peace.
This is where it gets wrapped up in feminism.
Yeah.
Like, is it a legit thing to say, okay, this marriage will keep its peace if she gives up on a certain kind of...
No, I hear what you...
Yeah, absolutely. Is sexism likely a factor in the husband's dismissive attitude towards his wife, and even the wife's perhaps somewhat dismissive attitude even towards her own needs, or normalizing his behavior? Yes, absolutely. Sexism, misogyny in heterosexual couples is always a factor. Yeah, you just can't get away from it, for sure. But how do we help him? How do we get him on board? Do we hammer him? Do we yell at him? Do we have negative thoughts about him? Or do we try to find common ground? Do we try to have compassion? That's what I'm always doing with my therapist. It's like, and I don't know, I'd have to ask her, but I think she's lost compassion for him. She's lost goodwill with him. And you have to return there. That's where things begin as a therapist. You have to start from a place of compassion. And usually that has to do with conceptualizing people accurately.
Recognition of her subjectivity.
I hear what you're saying, and it is a bad choice for her. Whether he can get beyond it, that would only have to do with the treatment that he's in with you. There's no other way he's going to get beyond it.
How does that help? Now, again, these are just snippets of conversations. Usually these meetings, supervision or consultation meetings, are an hour long. But from what I understand, the advisor just said, yeah, and he's just going to have to deal with it, or else, it's not going to work. Okay. What I would ask if I were in that advisor's shoes is I would ask the therapist, tell me about your countertransference. What's going on? Do you have compassion for this person? Because we got to start there. And then once we got that established, then I'd say, okay, so why do you think he's resisting? What is it about him that is causing him to resist? It's not usually a choice is the thing. It's not, clients don't usually say, ha ha ha, I'm going to ruin therapy today. I mean, sometimes they do, but not usually. So you have to have a conceptualization as to what is compelling him to resist, and then you have your answer for treatment. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Tune in next time when I continue watching this show. Very interesting. As you all know, I have a lot of stuff to say when I watch this show. I guess this is just, it's right up my alley. It's like a plumber watching a video about plumbing, So I tune in next time when I blab my mouth again about a show that is interesting. And I want to be clear, I'm worried, because sometimes, people on these shows actually watch my videos, or y'all will send it to them or something, and then they watch them. And then I feel bad. So if you're the therapist or the advisor, I fully understand this is a TV show. They edited it quite a bit. And, if I were in your shoes, who knows? I just talked earlier about how I would completely lose my crap. So I'm not saying that if there is a problem with the style or even the therapy itself, that is something horrible. I mean, couples therapy is the worst when it comes to countertransference. So it's easy for me to say from the outside. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.